Still good morning to everybody. Can we start this first panel session? First of all, it's truly an honor and an intellectual responsibility to moderate the panel on community engagement and language activism. I'm Tomasz Wicherkiewicz. I do represent one of the members of the Fosterland Consortium, namely Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, Poland. Okay, sorry. The idea behind the panel is to present quite a wide spectrum of different, of different contributions on, as I said, community engagement and language activism. Yeah. If you had a look into the program, I think we'll keep the order in order not to confuse anybody. We have 7 participants. 6 of them are with us. So I have the pleasure to introduce to you Zubair Torwali, Chutzka Laila Rorik, Jacqueline Canigan, Carlos Eduardo Ruda from Plan de Vida Proyecto NASA, Eddie Avila, Kasia Wojtylak, and remotely Jose Antonio Flores Farfan. So the presentation will extend from the Mapuche context, the Colombian Amazon, the Plan de Vida Proyecto NASA, Torwali experience, the Pakistani experience, the critical intervention of Eddie from Rising Voices, and the Hezkiat framework articulated by Chutzka Rorik. They together form not just a collection of case studies, but a remarkably coherent rethinking of language revitalization as a field. As you will see across these contributions, what becomes evident is that we are witnessing a shift away from a paradigm centered on language as objects to be saved toward one that understands language as a process of living, relating, and world making. In what follows, a synthesis through several thematic axes will be developed, each of which reflects a deep convergence across otherwise diverse geographical, cultural, and political contexts. Natalia, my colleague, will help me to moderate. So could you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia Verástegui. I'm a Peruvian linguist who works also in language revitalization, and I'm here to learn and also to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the first of the presentations of the contributors is by the co-founder of Idara Baraye Talim wa Taraqi from Pakistan, Zubair Torwali, who is an indigenous scholar, author, and human rights advocate from Upper Swat region in Pakistan. As a leading voice for the Torwali people, he co-founded the indigenous Idara Baraye Talim wa Taraqi. His work focuses on the preservation of endangered Dardic languages and cultures through documentation, education, and the development of local scripts. Beyond linguistics, Zubair is a prominent activist for indigenous land rights and environmental sovereignty. His academic and advocacy contributions bridge sociolinguistic theory with decolonial resistance, aiming to restore dignity and self-determination to the marginalized communities of North Pakistan. So, the title of your intervention is Strengthening Language and Identity, Case of the Torwali Language. The floor is free and our.
Thank you, Lingüística International. It's really an honor to be here. Okay. So it's really an honor to be here and present our work we have been doing for our language Torwali, which is spoken in the Swat Valley in northern Pakistan. I am really grateful to LinguaPex International and other colleagues and organizations who made it possible for me to be part of this gathering. First, before going to the slides, I would tell you a little bit about Pakistan. So there are 76 languages spoken in Pakistan, living languages, and about 8 out of these 76 are the majority languages. Urdu is the national language, and English is used as an official language of Pakistan. And the other majority languages are Punjabi, Pashto, Sindhi, Balochi, Brahmi, and to some extent Kashmiri. And the area to which I belong is dominated by the Pashtun language, majority language community. There are about 40 million people speaking Pashto. So this is the context. And we have been doing the revitalization work on the Torwali language for the last 2 decades, since 2004. And I will share a little bit about what was our approach and how we see revitalization. There are 27 endangered languages in Pakistan. Torwali is one of them. It is according to UNESCO. So among the 27 languages in Pakistan, most of these languages are in the northern parts of Pakistan, and Torwali is one of these languages. This is the Torwali community. You can see the picture, very beautiful valley in the upper Swat reaches. And the Torwali is an Indo-Aryan language, belongs to the subgroup Dardic. Population is approximately 150,000 people now, and about 50,000 or more have almost already migrated to the big cities in Pakistan. So Torwali has 2 dialects. One is the Bahrain main dialect, and the other is Chel dialect in the Swat Valley. So research from 1880 till now on the Torwali language, you can see John Biddulph, a British officer again. He wrote a book, Tribes of Hindu Kush, and he dedicated a chapter to Torwali in 1880. Then the Grierson, the famous linguist who did the Linguistic Survey of India, he wrote a book on the Torwali language in 1929. And then we have the era, 2001 and afterwards. So another American linguist did a PhD thesis on the Torwali language in 2001. And then from 2001 till 2008, we developed orthography, children course books, primers, etc. And from 2001, the work really started on the Torwali language. And you can see the continuum. Then 2010 and 2012 are first Urdu Torwali language dictionary was published. Folk poetry of Torwali language was published. And we also started a literacy program, bilingual literacy program for the adult women in 2012. 2015 was a good year for Torwali language because 3 major books were published along with a video musical album. And then the work went on, and till now, you can see now we have also started work on the AI, including Torwali in the AI system. We developed a data set for the Torwali last year, and the work is still continued. So now the revitalization strategy, what we have been doing, when we started work in 2004 and beyond that, initially we were only focused on documentation of the language. we didn't realize that revitalization is something beyond documentation, to go to the community, to build the community, and to enhance the community understanding of their language and also their confidence in their language. So we started a literacy program, mother tongue based literacy, multilingual literacy, Torwali based literacy program. Torwali, along with Torwali, we also included Urdu and English, and we established some aid schools. These schools were operating till 2023, and 2023 we ceased to operate this school because of no resources. About 2,000 school children were trained in their native literacy in Torwali, and also we developed many course books for the different grades up to 5 primary level grade. And this is the demography. You know that in Pakistan, some of the major languages are included in the public census, while minority languages are not included, and Torwali is one of them. So we did a research to know the number of the people who speak the Torwali language in 2015. And you can see, so 60% of the respondents told that they are 120, and 15 told that they are less than 80. When we started the work, so it was primarily preservation, but we thought that, okay, language is not an isolated phenomenon. It is very much linked to identity, to social justice, even to politics and decolonization of the indigenous people as well. So we also thought that, okay, language is best practiced within the musical traditions of the community as well. So we started to document the music of the Torwali people, their ancient genres and songs, and we started holding cultural festivals in the particular area. And when we had the first festival, Simam, in 2011, it was the period of the militants, the Taliban insurgency in Pakistan, in Swat Valley, but we somehow were successful to hold this gathering, this festival. And after that, every year, we have been holding similar festivals in the particular area. And now we in 2016, we also developed an Android keyboard for the Torwali people, so that they may use it to write their language on social media as well. And recently we have developed the dataset for the AI model with the Mozilla Foundation as well. So one of the key, as I told you, that language is very much linked to a cultural identity of the people. So when we started the work back in 2004, so the Torwali people, they used to call themselves Kohistani, a term, a name given by the Pashtun, imposed by the Pashtun. But when we found, because of our research, that the actual name of the language and of the community is Torwali, so we started reclaiming the Torwali identity. And after that, for now, we can see that the younger generations, they call themselves Torwali proudly. And I was the first person to write the Torwali as my second name in 2007. And everything is not okay, and everything is not that positive. So we have obstacles, we have challenges. You see that we often see that the communities are monolithic, but it is not so. There are subgroups, they have their own interest within the community. They can make obstacles in your way, and they can oppose you as well. And we also have, the different cultural or intergenerational gaps between the elderly people as well as the younger people. And now we can see that because of this globalization and social media and digital media, sadly we can say that Torwali, some of the domains are shrink, its obvious use, and we have less funding and less resources as the major challenges as well. Here I will end my, as a, you put me in a bad, in a difficult situation, so I will let the rest of the time for questions and answers, and I will love to answer and comments. You can do that. And if there is clarification needed, I will be happy to do that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Supari. Yes, I think we'll wait
yeah.
questions and answer session to the end of after the
Okay,
presentation.
fine.
Right? Thank you so much. Fine. Yes. Thank you. Okay, so now we are moving from South Asia to North America. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Chut Laila Rorik, who is Heshkiat First Nations researcher, educator, language advocate, whose work centers the revitalization of Heshkiat. She has worked closely with fluent Heshkiat elders to develop land-based language programs, immersive learning environments, community-driven resources. As a co-founder of the Heshkia language programs, she supports intergenerational knowledge transmission and language teacher development. She holds a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Language Revitalization, Reclamation, and Maintenance at the University of Victoria. Her work advances language resurgence through relational, land-based, and community-led approaches grounded in Heshkia knowledge systems. The title of Chuska's presentation is Language in Medicine, Relational Movement in Heshkia Language and Well-Being.
Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. I'm happy to see you all here. Sorry for the lack of translation. I am from the Heshkiat First Nation, which is located. Oh, there we go. The Nuchanos group of people is about 10,000 people on the west coast of Vancouver Island. You see pictured here. Vancouver Island is in the southwestern corner of Canada. It's off the coast of where the city of Vancouver is now. Vancouver Island is about 1/15 the size of Spain, or roughly the size of the country Taiwan. So we are the Nuchanos people of the west coast of Vancouver Island facing the Pacific Ocean. And we're a group of 14 tribes. Because of the legacy of Indian residential schools in Canada, we have less than 0.9% fluent speakers now since the start of residential school in our communities, which opened in the late 1800s. So they operated for roughly just over a century with our people, claiming all of the children from each of the Nuchanos communities that you see on the map here. The one closest to my home closed its doors in 1982. It's called Christie Residential School. So all of the people who were my parents' generation and above. They were all raised in these institutions. And then were returned to community as adults. So because that residential school closed in '82, I'm part of the first generation to stay at home with my parents and be raised there. So I went to a band-run school. So Haishkut First Nation was able to open a small, like one-room school to school us. And so that's the context that I come from, going to school with a dozen other kids in a community of about 100 people in a place that's accessible by ocean travel. So in 2014, after 4 years of learning my Haishkut language as an adult with my elders, I invited all of the fluent speakers that were left of Haishkut language, which was about 30 people at that time, and they were all over 65. I invited them all to come together for a weekend gathering. We're going to have a meeting about our language. So we met for 4 days, and at that gathering, the elders decided that they were going to start a committee of language speakers. So that was the beginning of what we now know as Haishkut language, and we've been running language courses ever since. So part of my presentation here is to just give you a short overview of some of the knowledge concepts that we can speak about that should be part of our education system in Canada, but are still not accessible through the education system. So our first concept is Slipmaqsti, and Slipmaqsti is very important to our Neutranoth understanding of how we can learn. Our Slipmaqsti is considered to be the space where your mind and your inner feelings coalesce, and that is where learning happens. It's within your body. So within the human body, you carry this Slipmaqsti. It's an individual thing. Everybody has their own Slipmaqsti for learning. And it's from your Slipmaqsti that your voice originates. And your voice when speaking Haishkut, because we are a very spiritual people, that our voice from our Slipmaqsti is able to connect to Creator and to all of creation. And that is because we have Slipmaqsti. And this is important to us as Haishkut people because I started learning my language as an adult and went to school in community, however, didn't have access to learning about Slipmaqsti, never even heard about it. So these are still concepts that need to be proliferated within our own communities. The second concept, really important to our ways of learning, is called Iqmut. Iqmut means two things in English. It's the way that we've always been is the way that we still are. We're ancient people and we're continuing. So in our Haishkut point of view, back to the beginning of time, when we understood the way our world was in the beginning of time in our Haishkut place, that ever since then, we've always been connected to those ancestors back into the beginning of time. And so our language and our people have lived with this space and the fluency of our language ever since the beginning of time in our understanding, except for this short little blip called Indian Residential School, or IRS for short, which is, roughly a century. So having taken the language from 3 to 4 generations of Haishkut people, when we look back into that period of history, we are going to see it as a small small part of our history where our continuity of ancestral ways continued through that, although thinly, but intact into the rest of our living ancestry. So Titsaqenq is very important to our people as a way of life, not a religion, but a spiritual understanding of how to live. Means that that your first calling in the morning is to Titsaqenq, speak with Creator, and that in English is intentionally with Creator, not to Creator, because it is understood to be more than a one-way conversation. It's a reciprocal thing where maybe sometimes you'll be directed by the voice or the tellings of Creator. So when you're speaking, when you're Titsaqenq, you are connecting to Hlitmaqsti. Your voice originates there and connects to all life forms, all relations, and throughout all of time. So in order to sort of visualize this understanding of time, of Iqhamut, of ancestral continuity, we need to sort of allow our watches, our GPSs, our computers to sort of float up into space and poof away and think about where you are in place now. And think about how we can experience time without those things guiding us on a daily basis, and that would help you to have a little bit more of an understanding of what it feels like to be Iqhamut, or ancient and continuing. So I had a story here that was told by Tsiek Pekhom, our Heshkut elder, and he was born in 1940, and he told this story about my ancestors. He says, "Yes, I remember your late dad was telling me that he went and walked up the river at Aisak. I guess there's a little waterfall there. Yes, he saw some coho salmon, and then he just started watching them, and my God," he shouted. "Those salmon jumped up and they hooked their teeth on the rocks under the waterfall, and they hung out for a little while. And then they went up the waterfall again. They flipped up off their teeth. They went up over the falls, and they said, 'Oh my, there's two of them. There's two coho.' And they saw two of them do that. It was really, really impressed. They didn't know that coho could do that with their teeth. They really saw it themselves." So our ongoing relationship with our places, our waters, and all the interacting life aligns with our understandings of our own continuity with Heshkut-speaking people in Heshkut territory. And it really helps us, and stories like this inform our understanding that extraordinary things are possible within all of creation and within our relationships with each other. So with that, I have come to a couple of minutes if there are any questions that arise. Just a warning, I'm not used to answering combative questions as are normal in academia. So please, if you're going to ask a question, be a friendly questioner.
Thank you so much. Definitely, I promise to keep the question and Q&A session friendly. Yeah?
Mhm.
Okay, now I give the mic to. Thank you very much.
Sí, tengo el agrado de volver a presentar a Jacqueline Margarita Caniguan, profesora académica y del Departamento de Lengua y Literatura de la Universidad de la Frontera, Gualmapu, Chile. Como ustedes conocen, ella se dedica al estudio de la lengua mapuche, tanto a nivel de investigación como también en el activismo y el fortalecimiento y revitalización de su lengua. I'm going to introduce to Jacqueline Margarita Caniguan. She is a full professor and academic at the Department of Language, Literature and Communication of the University of La Frontera, Mapu, Chile. She dedicates her work to study Mapuche language, both at a descriptive level and to its promotion, visibility, and revitalization. Thank you.
Pelei tati, Mari kompulamien. Reulamai sunguan tachi mulei tani kewan mapuche sungun piñei, cheo mulein tain mapuche sungulmo. Bueno, les vuelvo a saludar y en esta ocasión voy a comentar, hablar, presentar acerca de las distintas acciones que se realizan en el territorio mapuche, tanto en el lado chileno como argentino, con el fin de revitalizar nuestro idioma. Por eso que la presentación se denomina Cheo Muliaín Taín Mapuche Zumul, que quiere decir hacia dónde va nuestra lengua. Y en este caso, hablando un poco también de cómo se ha resistido a lo largo del tiempo y voy a partir con una metáfora. El clon o maqui es una planta, es un árbol que crece. Gracias. Es un árbol que es muy importante para la sociedad mapuche porque lo utilizamos en nuestras ceremonias sagradas, lo llamamos yafiaf, porque es lo que movemos mientras estamos en los bailes tradicionales. Pero además el clon produce esta especie de berries, se ha categorizado como berries de un sabor muy dulce y con lo que preparamos también bebidas y lo comemos mucho durante la infancia porque esta planta aparece en distintas partes. Y además, bueno, ahora los últimos estudios en este último tiempo, el clon se ha hecho bastante conocido por todas las propiedades antioxidantes que tiene y algunos atribuyen que por eso nos vemos más jóvenes. Como señalo, es un arbusto nativo muy fuerte y profundamente arraigado en el suelo del Gualmapu. Pese a la alteración de su hábitat natural, el maqui sobrevive de manera silvestre, brotando en los rincones más insospechados. Decimos que gracias a la memoria de la tierra y también porque las comunidades mapuches se han preocupado de que el maqui continúe su existencia. Ahora, a partir del año 78, aparece la amenaza del monocultivo, los eucaliptus, el pino, y aquí yo lo puse también, puse el castellano. No porque el castellano aparezca en el 78, sino que aparece en 1553. Pero en el fondo quise graficar la situación del mapuzungún como lo que ocurre con el maqui y la plantación forestal. Las plantaciones forestales masivas es un monocultivo que erosiona el suelo, consume el agua y desplaza la diversidad nativa. Este fenómeno ambiental, ¿cómo lo veía yo? Es tan parecido a lo que ha ocurrido con el castellano a lo largo de estos 4 siglos. Es decir, el reflejo de la hegemonía del castellano, que es también un monocultivo lingüístico, impulsado por el Estado, que asfixia la pluralidad de voces, asimilando y homogeneizando el territorio cultural. Entonces, en este último tiempo también, cuando uno observa todo el avance de la plantación forestal, nos ha llevado a la reflexión de que es es muy similar a lo que ocurre con el avance del castellano. Pero el maqui, pese a todo esto, pese a que sean miles de hectáreas de monocultivo forestal, el maqui a mí me impacta muchísimo porque de igual forma es tan porfiado que aparece en medio de la plantación forestal. Aquí no se ve, pero estos de por aquí son maquis que sobreviven dentro de la plantación forestal. Y de alguna manera nos va mostrando cómo la lengua, pese al avance tan acelerado y constante del castellano, pese a la situación, a los modelos educativos, pese a los medios de comunicación, de igual manera la lengua intenta, así como el maqui, sobrevivir y mantenerse, y sobre todo continuar y dar frutos. Y eso es lo que de alguna manera hemos visto en estos últimos años. Entonces, desde el siglo XX, inicios del siglo XX, están las primeras publicaciones bilingües, tal como yo señalé brevemente ayer. Lo mismo a partir en los años 40 a los 70, surgimiento de los poemarios. Ahí a partir de los 40 ya empiezan los mapuches a escribir poesía bilingüe. Y aquí hay que agregar además los discursos de los primeros políticos mapuches que optan por el camino, por la vía política, disputando espacios en el Congreso chileno. Y todos aquellos en esta época se instala la demanda lingüística dentro de las peticiones de los políticos de aquella época. Desafortunadamente después, en la dictadura militar, entre los 70 y el 80, se produce una de las persecuciones más severas y la prohibición del uso del mapuzungún en las escuelas, pero de igual forma, esto es también muy, muy interesante, surgen las organizaciones mapuches en resistencia. Hay una que hasta el día de hoy sobrevive, conocida como AZMAPU, que dio origen a la mayoría de los líderes mapuches de este último tiempo. Uy, me quedan 5 minutos. Asimismo, bueno, aquí hay una producción muy, muy importante de poesía bilingüe y también de música. La música, sí, efectivamente hay mucha producción como Puelcona, como Guayquil, como los Huerquienes del Amor, que ya están cantando en mapuzungún, mientras que la poesía todavía se mantiene bilingüe, castellano-mapuzungún. Hay mucho trabajo de traducción, mientras que hay grupos como Huerquienes que se tratan de hablantes nativos de la lengua. Y se está de alguna manera reconstruyendo el territorio lingüístico con el trabajo que ha estado desarrollando en estos últimos 15 años la organización mapuche Mapuzungún Letuayín, quienes han desarrollado lo que ellos llaman los Coneltún, o sea, los internados lingüísticos en Mapuzungún. Asimismo, hay trabajos que están generando producción didáctica completamente en mapuzungún, textos y relatos nacidos de la propia comunidad para enseñar a los niños y disputar la educación con pertinencia lingüística. Ahora, aquí un dato rápido, el 75% de hablantes de la lengua mapuche con mayor fluidez está en los ancianos sobre 70 años, mientras que los adultos entre 40 y 70 solamente un 35% y desafortunadamente entre niños y jóvenes el número es bastante menor. Para nosotros, la revitalización del mapuzungún no debe encasillarse únicamente en la escuela, pues el idioma es el vínculo natural del conocimiento, y aquí aparece el concepto de itrofilmonguén que tiene que ver con todos los elementos de la naturaleza. La lengua se reactiva desde las prácticas cotidianas, en la gestión comunitaria del agua, el trabajo de las huertas y el diálogo simétrico con la investigación académica. En este sentido, para nosotros, y aquí me voy a referir a un último proyecto que hemos iniciado, que se denomina Huiñotupetain Nitrofilmonguén, es decir, que retorne nuestra biodiversidad, que se trata de coproducir saberes en conjunto con las comunidades, es decir, conocimiento situado y coordinado sobre la gestión del agua, la biodiversidad, la agricultura y el territorio, respetando aquí la propiedad epistémica. Y en este sentido, además, la lengua aquí cumple un rol fundamental. Y para eso, de lo que mueve el proyecto es diseñar e implementar soluciones de adaptación hídrica y productiva con pertinencia cultural en 2 comunidades de la zona de la 8ª región, Yauyeu y Tuf, y proponer, esta es como la gran ambición, lograr proponer políticas públicas que transformen las directrices hacia políticas con verdadero carácter intercultural y ecológico. Para nosotros aquí estamos recién en la fase inicial, estamos en el año 1 del proyecto, no sé cómo va a ser, esta es una gran apuesta para nosotros. Somos un grupo interdisciplinario compuesto de profesionales de las humanidades, de las ciencias agronómicas y de las ciencias de la ingeniería. Y estamos, como digo, en la fase inicial de diagnóstico sociolingüístico y de la identificación de las necesidades y desafíos de la comunidad. Y el gran objetivo es que logremos coproducir en conjunto estrategias y materiales con las comunidades, fomentando la participación activa en el proceso de revitalización lingüística y no de traducción. Es decir, cómo podemos revitalizar, pero no centrándonos exclusivamente en la traducción. Por eso, para nosotros resulta muy importante cómo podemos generar conocimiento situado desde la lengua. Y dado que el tiempo ha concluido, entonces agradezco la atención. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Hola, hola. Muchas gracias, Jacqueline, por tu maravillosa presentación. Thank you, Jacqueline, for your presentation. And now I'm very glad to introduce to Carlos Eduardo Ruda Troches. He's Pedagogical Coordinator of the NASA project. He belongs to the indigenous territory of San Francisco in the municipality of Toribio, Cauca in Colombia, when his experience and learning was around the grandparents achieving the learning about the language and knowledge from NASA culture. Quiero introducir a nuestro colega Carlos Eduardo Ruth Troches. El proyecto NASA para Sudamérica resulta ser muy interesante por la autonomía que tienen y bueno, acá estamos muy contentos de recibirte. Gracias, Carlos.
Chucanas, Wallawachat. Men, Pencahue, Quech Ptunseñite, Chawai, Wallawachat, Nasa Wechnow, Chawaicha, Xawejas. Aite Quechas, Ifac Queaza, Wallawetuzutek, Hunk Temertuseñi, Nasa Ptunseñi Webnis, Quech Pahiptao. Un cordial saludo en nombre de nuestras autoridades ancestrales del territorio, Plan de Vida Proyecto NASA de Colombia, Cauca, Colombia, en representación del proceso de la revitalización de la lengua NASA. Anteriormente, en los libros se escribe la lengua paez. Hoy lo conocemos y ya fundamentamos, es la lengua, el Hunktewish, la lengua NASA. Dentro de este ejercicio, rápidamente, me llena de alegría poder aquí compartirles desde mi sentir y ver y escuchar. Sabemos de que aquí hay pensamientos diferentes, contextos diferentes, pero la misma misionalidad que todos estamos luchando por la revitalización y fortalecimiento de nuestras lenguas. Dentro de ese escenario, nosotros hablamos de revitalizar la lengua para pervivir con identidad y dignidad, porque los que han antecedido pueblos hermanos. Es la misma historia, esa historia que nos ha marcado. Dentro de este ejercicio, por eso hablamos de dignidad. Pensar desde nuestras raíces, de nuestro ser, de quiénes somos y qué debemos de hacer para seguir perviviendo en el tiempo. Y de ese pervivir en el tiempo son nuestras semillas de vida, que son nuestros hijos e hijas, las futuras generaciones. En ello tenemos que dejar este legado que nuestros mayores nos han ido dejando. Parto con esta reflexión. Rápidamente, la ubicación geográfica, el pueblo Nasa, dentro de Colombia, el Abya Yala. Estamos nosotros en el Cauca, Colombia, y en nuestro territorio, Plan de Vida Proyecto NASA de Toribio, en los 3 territorios, Toribío, Tacuello y San Francisco. El pueblo Nasa, el pueblo indígena de Colombia, 112 pueblos indígenas reconocidos en Colombia, más de 70 lenguas habladas en el país, 250,000 personas del pueblo Nasa, en 8 departamentos, 3 ciudades capitales. En el territorio donde yo habito somos más de 34,000 aproximadamente, Nasas que estamos en ese proceso de la revitalización. La estructura organizativa, la centralidad desde el nivel local. Iniciamos a nivel nacional, que nos representa la organización indígena ONIC, en 1982 creada. Luego está el Consejo Regional Indígena en el Cauca, CRIC, que nace en el 1971. A nivel zonal, la Asociación de Cabildos Indígenas, Zona Norte, ahí estamos nosotros los 22 territorios, el Plan de Vida Proyecto NASA, que fue nacida en el 1994 como Plan de Vida Proyecto NASA, como plan de vida de la organización. Y a nivel local, los 3 territorios que ya les mencionaba, el municipio de Toribío, Cauca. El proceso de la revitalización en el marco de la resistencia política lingüística y agentes revitalizadores, rápidamente en esta línea de tiempo, podemos nosotros hacer la anotación desde el 1492, cuando está la invasión y la resistencia ancestral, pues fue una de las necesidades urgentes como organización indígena del pueblo Nasa en el año 1971, la creación del Consejo Indígena CRIC para mirar toda esa situación coyuntural de conflicto y de invasión que estábamos sufriendo. Desde ese entonces, vemos que hay un trabajo trasfondo donde podemos nosotros detallar de que cómo nosotros empezamos a velar por nuestra identidad cultural. Porque si la invasión fue tan fuerte que nos venía, como dice, absorbiendo. En esa lucha, desde 71, ya empezamos a plantear de formar profesores bilingües, de enseñar en nuestra lengua, y es lo que pues ha logrado fundamentar en esta línea de tiempo. Nace también el programa de educación bilingüe en el 78, y en el 2006 a nivel regional se hizo el primer autodiagnóstico de conocer cómo está el estado de la lengua. Y sabemos muy bien de que pues en esa época pues la mayor parte de la población indígena nasa éramos hablantes. Todavía éramos hablantes. En el 2007 ya la Minga de Lenguas Política Lingüística Regional empieza a tomar decisiones a favor de la lengua, pero por la coyuntura y social y el tema del conflicto armado que a nivel organizacional ha sido el tema más duro. A pesar de eso, dentro de ese ejercicio, hemos venido nosotros hablando de la revitalización, del fortalecimiento. Y en el 2011 ya partimos como experiencia de entender y comprender cómo está el estado de la lengua y mirar ya acciones concretas alrededor del proceso. Y en el 2012 ya los agentes como tal, el pueblo vasco, da una mirada técnica desde su experiencia y nos lleva a dar esos primeros pasos de estrategias de revitalización. En el diagnóstico que hacemos en el 2012, pues como podemos ver la situación, personas y la transmisión solamente hablan mayormente los mayores, poca transmisión en los niños y niñas, falta de personal hablante para asumir procesos y afectación del conflicto armado porque estamos sometidos a ello. Reconocimiento y recursos, falta de prestigio de la lengua de sus hablantes, falta de metodologías y materiales, reconocimiento cultural más no político organizativo y falta de recursos y apoyos institucionales. Es lo que recogimos en el diagnóstico porque vimos este diagnóstico muy preocupante. El 73% no entiende y no habla la lengua. El 13% la habla bien, el 9% entiende pero no habla, el 5% entiende y habla poco. Este proceso nos centramos nosotros ya dentro del plan de vida dentro del plan de vida de mi territorio, de las 3 autoridades, a tomar decisiones alrededor de cómo vamos a revitalizar la lengua. Entonces nos concentramos desde la casa, porque hay que partir desde la familia, ver cómo estoy yo en el tema de la transmisión de la lengua. Si no partimos de la familia, podemos crear nidos lingüísticos, podemos hacer el prestigio, pero la base es la que se fundamenta, que se entienda y se comprenda, y que esa generación que hoy son jóvenes, familias jóvenes, y de ellos pues toca, como dice, buscarle esa estrategia de cómo hacemos como esa propuesta de trabajo desde la familia. Y también el plan de vida, que es nuestra organización en el 2017, nuevamente hace una valoración de cómo está el territorio en el tema de no solamente la lengua, sino en el tema social, territorial y coyuntural. Es donde ya nuevamente hacen una reproyección al 2050 y dentro de ese ejercicio queda nuestro proceso, dentro del proceso educativo, un gran sueño que al 2050 nuevamente ver niños, jóvenes y familias vivenciando la lengua, la identidad cultural y las prácticas culturales. Y ya también como estrategia, en el 2020 logramos crear nuestro plan estratégico de revitalización como una política lingüística territorial de toma de decisiones y responsabilidades para que esto, lo que al 2050 estamos soñando, se cumpla, porque no es en un documento que siempre ha pasado que se queda, sino que debe ir a la práctica. Es lo que hemos logrado consolidar. Y las estrategias que estamos desarrollando en el 2024, hemos tenido también apoyos de la cooperación AECID, Garavide, ahora estamos con LinguaPax. Agradecer por ese espacio de ver que lo que estamos haciendo tenga una mirada no solamente territorial, sino también nacional, internacional, y por eso estamos por aquí. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Antes de terminar, represento las estrategias de revitalización en un árbol que, como podemos ver y sabemos, la raíz que debe partir un proceso de revitalización, y la raíz es de nuestra identidad cultural, el tema espiritual. Entonces, la motivación y la activación o relato del plan de vida, el pueblo NASA, para revitalizar organizacionalmente, parte desde la orientación de nuestros mayores, porque ellos son los que conocen y desde su espiritualidad NASA dan esa fuerza, esa conexión, esa lucha, porque no estamos trabajando algo vacío, sino estamos logrando impregnar un conocimiento de toda esa sabiduría y mostrar que no se está hablando el vacío, sino se está hablando de una sabiduría, un conocimiento de qué debemos de hacer, para qué lo vamos a hacer y por qué lo estamos haciendo. Entonces, a favor de ello, hoy no solamente hablamos de la revitalización, sino también el cuidado de nuestra madre tierra. Si nuestra madre tierra está bien, el pueblo NASA está bien. Pero si la madre tierra está hoy como lo tenemos, descuidada, abandonada, así mismo está la comunidad. pues por el tiempo no me quiero profundizar. Dentro de este árbol, como lo pueden ver, dentro de esas estrategias venimos dinamizando y haciendo como ese trabajo ya operativo, porque es no decir, sino empezar a hacer. Ese es uno de los retos que nos ha llevado, es no decir, sino hacer, vivenciar ese proceso que hoy tenemos que empezar. Entonces, eso sería por mi parte. Muchas gracias por atenderme.
Gracias. Thank you very much. I want to remind you that we'll have an opportunity to honor and celebrate Plan de Vida activity tonight at 6:30.
Thank you. Tengo el agrado de presentar a Eddie Ávila. Él es director de Rising Voices, la rama digital de Global Voices, una iniciativa global que provee de preparación o entrenamiento y oportunidades de redes laborales educativas para las lenguas minorizadas y en toda Latinoamérica, África y Asia. Muchas gracias por venir, Eddie, y estamos aquí para escucharte.
Gracias. I'm going to give the talk in English. So thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for the invitation to come to this forum. Mentioned I'm Eddie Avila. I'm director of Rising Voices with the organization Global Voices, and we've been exploring for the past 20 years, working with communities that are interested in using digital media, digital tools for language promotion, language revitalization. And something we're seeing lately is sort of dominant narratives around technology, especially around AI. Many communities are hearing that you need to get on board or you'll get left behind. And I think that causes really unfair pressure, expectations on many communities to get on board. And often that leads to, perhaps waiving rights or making trade-offs, compromises in order to be, generously included in some of these technologies. Part of that is also understanding how these technologies work, including, how money gets in the middle of that, in terms of business models and, why companies want more and more languages on their platforms. And I think we all recognize that communities have the right to pause, question, and make informed decisions if and or how their languages are included in these technologies. And I think that word "if" is really, really important here. And it shouldn't be assumed that communities, want to be in these technologies, but rather if they want to be included. In a similar way that, communities have the right to make decisions on physical land territories. I think there's more and more recognition that, cyberspace is also another, frontier and where communities should be given the same considerations on consultation, self-determination, and decision-making, because many of these territories online are, walled gardens where companies want everyone to fall in line and they decide how, people use their technologies and, how the data is used. And so, technology has always been about power, who decides, who's included, how the data is used, where it comes from. I think, this interest in AI is no different. So as I mentioned, Rising Voices, we've been around for about 20 years. And over the 20 years, we worked with many, many communities around the topic of digital activism. This is intentional actions, campaigns, initiatives where speakers are creating, initiatives online to, create change that they want to see with their languages. And so our model has been, really about opting in the use of these tools, building connections with peers, peer learning. That's sort of the direction we head with this. And so we've approached this and not asking how do you use technology, but rather what are some of the questions we should be asking. And we've run a number of workshops in the past year, which I'll talk about in a bit, where we, break down some of these narratives, in talking and facilitating spaces where indigenous language speakers can talk about these issues in a safe space without any judgment. Even though we present these workshops as AI and languages, inevitably there's disappointment that we're not teaching how to create content with AI, but rather just having conversations around it. And that's been really, really powerful to see, the results of that. But obviously recognizing there are, oops, I'm changing the wrong slide. Inevitably there's interest in understanding that there are opportunities with these tools, but under what conditions. And I think that's what we're aiming for when we work with these communities. I think a big part of it is, literacy, understanding that it's not really intelligent, but rather, as one of the speakers mentioned yesterday, about probabilities and how that really works, and just kind of defining the different terms, the history, and really the implications of that, especially around data. What data does it consume? Where does it come from? Who may profit from that data? But also some of the alternatives. I think alternatives also include doing nothing or something later weight. I think we've seen in many other regions, especially North America and Oceania, that there are groups that are exploring alternative models, a third way, which is not either working with the companies or not at all, but rather perhaps developing tools on their own terms. And so, a big part of it is listening to the communities, but also within that, understanding community can mean very, very different things. Acknowledging that within a community, there are many different entry points to understanding how these technologies work. There's different experiences that can inevitably lead to different positions on that. Even within language community, we've seen varied perspectives. Someone may say, our language is really under threat. If there's something we could do about it with any tools, yes, it may mean some trade-offs, but I think it's a way for us to reach more people. And others who are saying, even if there's any possibility of harm coming from this, we'd rather not get involved. So I think recognizing both positions are valid. And at the end, the goal is to arrive to informed decision-making and not necessarily, falling in line with a consensus that maybe one doesn't believe in. I think something we've seen in these workshops, I think there's a big interest in seeing how these communities align with indigenous values. Not exploring, is this tool good or bad, but rather, does this tool serve to what we define as our own priorities, and taking consideration, principles like care, which is the collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility to ethics, to understanding that indigenous communities have the possibility to decide on those principles and how they, roll out with a specific tool. And just understanding the community should be the ones that define what beneficial means, not tech companies. So we ran 2 events in the last 15, 16 months in Mexico, one in Mexico City, and last month in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, where we invited around 60 digital activists representing around 15 different languages in Mexico, just to connect them and listen to them and ask them questions. And what was really, really powerful is that we brought in a number of facilitators that were peer facilitators. They're also indigenous. Many of them are also working in software development, working on some of these models. And so having someone that has that technical background, but also understands local context and some of the considerations that indigenous communities have that maybe some in tech companies may not necessarily have. And that's really been a powerful approach that, I think we're really proud that we're able to do that. And I think, at the end of these processes, understanding that perhaps they go away with even more questions that they came in with, which is okay. I think that's part of the process, is understanding that there's even more to find out and finding how we can facilitate those spaces for discussion. And so this is one of the examples of the open call we had for the workshop in Chiapas. We received a lot of interest in that, but again, even though we spell out pretty clear that this is not about teaching how to use AI, but rather, as the workshop is called, AI and Indigenous self-determination. So I think that really captures what the workshop was about, to really have a space to not only understand for themselves, but also start introducing the possibilities of activists becoming bridges back to their community and helping their own community understand and navigate, this new world, especially in terminology and in approaches that maybe are more culturally or linguistically relevant. And in the Mexico City workshop, we had the accompaniment of a scriber, which is someone that listens all day and maps out a lot of the conversations that were had. This is available on the Rising Voices website in one of the articles. And so you could see more closely on some of the concerns, but also, we also didn't necessarily hear all doom and gloom, but rather some hope that, yes, there are possibilities with these technologies, but only if they are developed under their terms and aligns with their own values. And so I think that's something where we want to continue replicating in more countries around the region, because I think that's really important to listen and hear from them, and not necessarily assume that this is inevitable and that they need to jump on board, or else that their language will be left behind. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you very much. Now, I have a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Kasia Wojtylak, who is an assistant professor at the University of Warsaw, specializing in anthropological linguistics, linguistic typology, language documentation, and language revitalization. Kasia's research focuses on indigenous languages of Northwest Amazonia, especially the languages of Caquetá Putumayo region in Colombian Amazon, as well as multilingualism, language contact, and the relations between linguistic diversity, cultural practices, and indigenous knowledge. After completing her PhD in Australia, she worked as a postdoc researcher at James Cook University in Australia and the University of Regensburg in Germany. She's currently based at the University of Warsaw. Since 2012, she has developed long-term research collaborations with indigenous communities in Colombia, Peru, and Australia. She's actively involved in linguistic activism, community engagement, connecting indigenous researchers, activists, and language practitioners across Amazonia and beyond. The title of her intervention is Community Engagement and Language Activism among Indigenous Communities in the Colombian Amazon. Kasia, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see most of you that always just get me talking about Amazonian languages. So today I wanted to talk about the community engagement in language activism, especially in the region of southern Colombia, in the Caquetá and Putumayo region, as Tomasz has said. So let me change this. I don't know how. Okay. I hope you can see most of the slides because I see the transcription. So I wanted to bring this perspective, especially the perspective of indigenous peoples, and how they understand language activism and what they do in order to promote language activism. So in the Amazon, language is part of how people maintain relationships, especially with the territory. And I stress here the notion of the territory, which is much stronger than, for instance, in European concepts. And also the relationship, not just with the territory, but also with the elders, with ancestors, with plants, animals, and especially with the non-human beings. And language is used to remember, advise, heal, govern, care for the land, and keep social and spiritual relations with the surrounding world in balance. So it's not just about using the words, it's about keeping the relationship in balance through the language. So in the Caquetá-Putumayo region, language activism therefore takes place in concrete spaces, very important ones, the Maloca and the Mambeadero, that I will show you in a moment, where the circle of word of coca and tobacco that I will talk about to you today is transmitted. Let me, somebody took my mouse. Okay, so I am talking about those specific two settings, the Maloca setting, when the language is transmitted and the meaning of the words are given, and the Mambeadero, the secret spaces where the coca and tobacco are shared, but also discussed, and they give power to the words that are spoken. Yes, so please remember those two places, the Maloca and the Mambeadero, because I will repeat them many times today. Well, okay. Yes. So these very settings, they organize the relationships, the Maloca and the Mambeadero, because the elders speak in the Mambeadero of the Maloca, because Mambeadero is in the Maloca, and the families transmit advice there as well. The teachers from schools bring the kids to the Maloca, and the young people record, translate, and share their stories in the digital world, but the stories that they've learned in the Maloca. Yeah, so it's all Maloca based, if you will. So the main argument of my presentation is that in the Caquetá-Putumayo region, the language activism depends these relations that are created in the Maloca and in the Mambeadero, because these are the places where the speech is authorized, transmitted, and meant meaningful. Yeah. So for this panel, this Amazonian perspective helps us to ask a very concrete question: how do communities themselves define linguistic vitality, and what practices they use to sustain it? So this question, I think, also matters for European minoritized language context, where everyday use, international, intergenerational transmission, and community authority are also central. Okay, so we are talking about this Amazonian context, and I refer to this Caquetá-Putumayo region as a region that is very highly multilingual. In this region of Northwest Amazonia, you can see that there are many language families, and here what you see here is not just languages, but entire language families. And it's home to many diverse groups, such as, for instance, the Carib, the Arawak people, which are the biggest Amazonian group in South America. And on top of this, you have a couple of groups that we are going to focus on today: the Arawak, one Arawak language, the Witotoan people that you see in the bottom, the Boran people, and the Andoka Isolate. So those are the Caquetá-Putumayo people, but just keep in mind that this is a very highly multilingual region. Yeah. Okay, so the people of this region of the Caquetá-Putumayo are known collectively as the people of the center. Or los hijos del tabaco, la coca y la yuca dulce, because it has to do with the myth of origin. All of those people of the Caquetá-Putumayo region come from a small hole in the ground from which they emerge. A shaman or a jaguar cuts their tails and they become humans. Yeah, so those are the Caquetá-Putumayo people. And those people have long been connected through multilingualism, ceremonial exchange of coca and tobacco, those secret plants, intergroup relations of different types of alliances between groups, and obviously shared ritual practice. I don't know how to... I should be on slide 7. Sorry about this. Yes, now it is. Okay, so I should click on the left button. Okay, so these were the people that I was talking to you about right now, that I was introducing: the Witotoan, Boran, Arawak, and the Andoke people. Okay, sorry about this. So the key traditional spaces of speech are the Maloca, which is the communal house, as you've seen on the picture, the Mambeadero, where this discourse or the regimen of the word or coca and tobacco are given. And this speech is connected to Mambe, which is the powdered coca that you can see here in the picture, and the Ambil, which is the tobacco paste. Yeah? And elders use the language to give advice, to narrate origin, to transmit ecological knowledge, to settle the conflicts, and to guide younger people. But this is all done by means of coca and tobacco. Yeah. The rubber boom genocide in the CP and the Caquetá Putumayo region, followed by forced displacement, missionization, schooling, and Spanish dominance, severely weakened intergenerational transmission in the Caquetá Putumayo region. It's estimated that more than 90% of the Caquetá Putumayo group disappeared completely, died out during the time of the rubber boom and the aftermath. What happened afterwards. Entire language groups and many clans disappeared totally. We only have a couple of clans that remain, and a couple of those languages, the one that I showed you before, those are the survivals, the ones who survived the rubber boom of the 19th century. So in these settings, indigenous languages were often prohibited and punished, including death, and very stigmatized. And all, especially children, were pushed towards speaking Spanish, and many families stopped transmitting their language openly. Today, most languages of the region are critically endangered. And what I mean by critically endangered is, for instance, language such as Andoque is spoken by just 30 people. Language such as Nonuya is spoken by 4 people. Okaina is quite a big language, which is spoken by 100 people. So you are talking about very small numbers. And out of all of them, Murui Moina language, the one that I dedicated my life for, is spoken by about 2,000 people. And this is a huge group in the Caquetá Putumayo. Yeah? Okay, so the Maloca and the Mambeadero are those traditional spaces of transmission, and in some communities, especially in the remote areas, these spaces and practices have continued with greater strength. Obviously, just the closer you are to the cities, the less language you speak, if you will. And current activism often means reconnecting younger people with the Maloca and the Mambeadero spaces, where reconnecting the youth with the words of the elder, the secret coca and tobacco practices, the origin narrative, and so forth. Okay, so in the Caquetá Putumayo context, language activism is very concrete. It appears in practices that make indigenous languages visible, again, after violence, displacement, schooling, and Spanish dominance. So one practice is naming. So for instance, using indigenous names instead of the Spanish names, such as for instance, the name for coca, which in the Morimoina is hibie. So they use hibie instead of the Spanish all dominant word coca. Another practice is translation, because it allows stories and oral histories and ritual knowledge and explanation for things that exist in the world to circulate across a generation. Local materials are also another form of activism, such as, for instance, language booklets, recordings, posters, school resources, films. They make language visible beyond private and ritual context. And the youth media extends these practices further, such as, for instance, video, subtitles, social media. They allow indigenous languages to appear in contemporary formats. And those examples shows what language activism might look like in the Amazonian context. So, as I said, naming the language, naming the things that exist in the world by its true names, not by the Spanish name, which is not considered to be true. Okay. Okay, I got it right. So, so these practices, they depend on specific people and relations. The most important, obviously, are the elders or the sabedores, whose linguistic authority carry origin stories, songs, advice, healing, all this kind of knowledge, including the principles of living well. Those are those principles given by the coca and tobacco. The speech of the elders is learned only by listening in the Maloca. It cannot be learned otherwise. Yeah, so you need to be in the Maloca in order to understand this. And by sitting at the mambeadero and chewing coca with the elders. Yeah. Teachers also mediate those relationships because they bring kids from school to the Maloca so they can learn properly. They can learn the true meanings of those of tobacco and coca. Obviously, there is families that are also very important because they teach kids through kinship, through plant names and the stories. And as I said, young people participate by listening to elders and recording those stories and give them the new face, new life in the digital world. And as I said, and I stress this again and again, the setting is the most important aspect of all of this, because it is in the Maloca, in the Mambeadero, where children learn the original language that gives them access to knowledge, and that knowledge cannot be accessed through Spanish. As I said, what's very important for the Caquetá Putumayo people is the spiritual world, and the spirits cannot listen. They don't know how to listen to Spanish. They only listen to indigenous language. So in order to connect with the spirits and in order to understand the world of the spirits in which we are in balance all of the time, you need to speak indigenous language. You cannot speak Spanish because then it doesn't make any effect on the spirits because they don't speak Spanish. Okay, so this is why this community engagement is central in the Amazonian context, because the language work depends on the elders speaking in the Mambeadero, in the Maloca, teachers bringing children to the Maloca, and young people recording and translating everything in the Maloca, in the actual ritual space. Okay, so youth, young people in the Colombian Amazon, they use recordings, videos, subtitles, and so forth to make the recordings of the traditional elders meaningful. So we can have many different types of initiatives, such as, for instance, Kalhana Uai, which is a school of indigenous communication in Leticia, where the school connects audiovisual production with the knowledge of the elders and the artists, and the people learn how to actually do it. So one concrete example is this animated short film called Hibina Komuidiano, which is the origin of coca, that presents a Murui story through this visual material, but done in from the perspective of the indigenous people. We have also another speaker here of another person from a Bora community of the Caquetá Putumayo, who says, spaces of the circle of the word, our own fabric and arts, ancestral medicine, connection with nature and its manifestations, these are our own systems of communications that as youth we must protect and value. As technology advances, to use this means to possess and to get involved in the promotion of knowledge and wisdom is to consolidate the right to indigenous communication. Now, so for the Caquetá Putumayo people, digital visibility becomes meaningful only when it remains tied to elders, families, the Maloca, then the Mambeadero, and the priorities of the community. It's all tied to those places. So what makes tools useful for language activism? So the Caquetá Putumayo case shows a gap between recognition and transmission. Colombia gives strong legal recognition to indigenous people. So the 1991 constitution recognized indigenous languages as official in the territories, as was said by some before. There is the native language law of 2010 that protects and promotes languages. Yet in many Caquetá Putumayo communities, everything has shifted to Spanish. There is the same gap when it comes to education. Everything has shifted to Spanish. And language communication has the role of archiving, of documenting. But to the Caquetá Putumayo people, it is only meaningful if the language communication is directly tied to the community, with the community principles. So the main point, maybe I will just skip on because I don't have much time, Tomasz says. So the main point is very simple. Tools that we have, they only help when they come to the community life. Recognition, school materials, recordings, digital media, they support language activism, but they need to be tied to the Maloca, to the Mambeadero spaces, and to the elders' words of coca and tobacco. Yes, so this is my concluding slide. So I would like to close with 4 lessons that maybe we can learn from the Caquetá Putumayo case. In this region, language activism is sustained in specific places and practices. It takes place in the Maloca, the communal house that we've seen, in the Mambeadero, where the words of tobacco and coca are given, in the words of the elders who transmit the stories and the meaning of true words. Yes, because it's not just lexical. Each word has a meaning. Each word has a value to it. As well, there is also language activism in school connection that brings back kids to the Maloca, and in those youth recordings on social media. So the first point is that language activism is tied to the territory. I stressed before, the connection of the indigenous people to the territory is very deep. The spirits of the people are from the territory. They live in the territory of the people, so then they don't come out of it. Yes? So if you take indigenous people from their territory, they lack the connection to the spirits. The second point is that language activism is tied to concrete practices. In this case, the practice of coca and tobacco, which is a form of care for people and the territory. Learning a language is therefore means learning how to behave, how to listen, how to speak carefully, and how to live properly in relation to the people, the territory, and non-human beings who inhabit it. It's all done through the words of tobacco and coca. And the third point is that young people are creating new routes for language use, but this is done while reconnecting with the traditional spaces, and only through those reconnection it is actually meaningful. And the fourth point, it concerns external support, which is, for instance, documentation and so forth, recording. So this is very useful, but it needs to be connected to the traditional spaces, such as the ones as the Maloca and tobacco. So this is where the Colombian Amazon speaks directly to European minoritized language context, I think, because for this forum, the Amazonian contribution is clear. Language works, language becomes meaningful when it's rooted in the community relations, yes, that give word authority and force. In the Caquetá Putumayo case, these relations include elders, youth, secret plants, tobacco and coca, the territory, and the non-human words, the world of the spirits. And language activism, therefore, begins in these relations, in the spaces where the language still organizes life. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasia. Now we'll listen we'll watch the presentation sent by Jose Antonio Flores Farfan, but this will be commented by Joseph Cruz. Well, just a few words of introduction. You probably know that Jose Antonio Flores Farfan is a research professor at CSUS and LinguaPac's representative in Latin America. He holds a PhD in linguistics from the University of Amsterdam. He has worked at the Center for Research and Health Studies in Social Anthropology. He currently coordinates the Digital Archive of Indigenous Languages and the project Linguistic Revitalization of the Arts. His research focuses on indigenous languages, language contact, language planning, and revitalization. For decades, he has promoted materials in indigenous languages through a participatory, multilingual, and multimodal approach, especially aimed at strengthening endangered linguistic communities. And Joseph Cruz, a member of LinguaPax, is now the executive board secretary, and together with José Antonio Farfán, he has collaborated for 2 decades in the production of materials in indigenous languages through the linguistic and cultural revitalization, maintenance, and development project. His research has focused on analyzing grassroots efforts in both Mexico and Chile for the recovery of indigenous language and cultures.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Then I'm last today and I'm first after lunch, so you won't have to, introduce me later. I'm not José Antonio Flores Farfán, as Thomas said. I'm Josep. I've been working together with José Antonio for over 20 years. I was actually kind of, thinking of when we met, and we actually met in 2002 here in Barcelona for a Congress on Language Policy and Planning. And that was, the beginning of a very fruitful, and beautiful friendship, So I'm going to José Antonio has recorded some of the slides, so we'll try to make it work and listen to what he has recorded. It's 4 a.m. now in Mexico, so we thought that, a good way of presenting our work that I'm going to complement later, actually. So you'll see that I won't say that there is an overlapping, but you'll see that there's a little bit of work that we do together. And although, I'll be focusing later on a specific project that we are developing in Puebla, the state. What I'm going to do now is to present more, the project that he's been leading for over 20 years in the production of materials in indigenous languages of Mexico, but not just Mexico. So I'll show you some examples, and then later, after lunch, when it's a siesta time, I'll be presenting some of the latest projects. So this is the name of the project. Not very original. Maybe we should get some marketing, advice to make it a little bit more sexy. But this is the name of the project, the Cultural Linguistic Revitalization Maintenance Development Project. As I was saying, it's been going on for 20 years. It began with the production of printed materials in indigenous languages, but with time, we've been incorporating multimodal materials, in the project, to kind of collect the oral and visual traditions that are so important in indigenous cultures. The materials are co-authored, are co-produced. I'll say more about that later. It includes animation, augmented reality, and even video games. José Antonio developed, with a team of people. Of course, it's not just José Antonio; it's a lot of people involved in this project. And if you go to Tlacuatzin.org, you have some examples of the work we've been doing together. The project tries to foster, pedagogical innovation, linguistic healing. Also, this is a lot of emphasis on the well-being of communities, how language revitalization can actually help, with the improving the well-being of the communities, and also sociocognitive recovery. And we'll see a few examples. So let me check whether we can hear José Antonio's voice here.
Let me talk a little bit now about the digital ecologies. Digital ecologies are very important also in language revitalization.
Put up the volume a bit.
And they favor language revitalization. Of course, the web digital resources today is one of the most powerful, I would say, spaces, means, efforts favoring language revitalization. It counters, for example, linguistic discrimination in as much it allows speakers to gain visibility in the web of the languages and put the minoritized languages on an equal base with the global languages. It also embraces the community possibilities of innovating their languages, turning them into modern languages, contemporary languages, which has a very important effect on the self-esteem of the speakers. And also through digital ecologies, with this ecology, we can also reject very static and exclusionary models that are imposed from the top down, such as very conservative school approaches to teaching a language. And instead, we can appropriate the digital means as a living space to interact, not really as an archive, not something that's static knowledge of the language, but as a very dynamic and powerful means to a very important means to empower the speakers of minoritized languages. So digital ecologists these days have provided with very interesting anti-colonial practices, expanded the domains of the minoritized languages through the web, for example, and internet, allowing communities to generate content in social media, and we can see that around the world, and in web platforms. And in one word, we could say the technology or digital technology is a very interesting way of resisting the imposition, the displacement, the language shift, and a very interesting possibility of reversing language shift. So the digital ecologists allow us to reposition.
Okay, I just wanted you to hear Jose Antonio's voice, because it's an exercise of ventriloquism here, although as I said, we've been working together for many years, but it's his presentation actually, and of course, I just wanted to hear, what she could say. She was using this concept of digital ecologies actually, and the idea is to put all those languages also in the digital domain, to give them more prestige, to engage young people. We've been saying before, how important it is to get young people and children using those languages. And as you know, social media and the digital domain more generally are very good ways of engaging young people, okay? There's some, of course, limitations and possibilities for digital domain that Eddie was already kind of pointing out, and maybe later in the afternoon session we can talk more about that. But what I'll show you now is some of the examples that of the materials we produced. There's some animation in minorities languages. As I said, we do use augmented reality, and for that you need a mobile phone and download an app on Google Play, which again, it's engaging for young people. It allows you to hear the voices also, that how important orality is among the use of indigenous languages. So, but at the same time, you're kind of mediating the communication with a mobile phone, and maybe that's not what you want in a school context with children. So it's a little bit kind of, it's something we can discuss later. Again, these are some of the examples here of the work we've been doing. The knowledge that we introduce also, that we use to produce the booklets is cultural specific. It draws from the environment where indigenous peoples live. We have one book, for example, here, which is called Ajolote, the axolotl, and how important that is. For example, the connection between that. It's an important animal in the worldview of indigenous peoples in central Mexico, most of all. But also it's very much connected to environmental issues. So again, and making connections with what other presenters have presented, in previously. how important it is, to make that connection between language revitalization and environmental issues. The ajolote is highly endangered. It is a highly endangered species. Okay, so this is the book of the ajolote. One of the things that I'll say later also, after, is the high quality of the materials we produce. So these are very high quality materials, which is not common, when materials are produced for indigenous languages, no? Sometimes what you have is photocopies in black and white, something like very much, not made in a professional way. That's not the case with the materials we produce, no? I'm going to concentrate on how the project has kind of branched out, and how it has inspired other communities, other indigenous languages communities beyond Mexico. Because as I said, later after lunch, I'll concentrate on one specific project with Nahua people in Mexico. No? What we have here is a booklet with augmented reality in Quechua from northern Ecuador. And one of the interesting things here is that the book is bilingual, and you have it in Quechua and in English. And what we do, of course, that's the choice of the linguistic community. They didn't want Spanish there. They saw Spanish as the language that pushes, Quechua out of use, not English. Actually, they saw English as additive bilingualism, if you want to use that term, rather than Spanish as subtractive bilingualism. And it's been done with people in Imbabura who are actually connected to our NASA friends here. There's this kind of transborder cooperation also between NASA people in the Cauca region of Colombia and Quechua people in the northern region of Imbabura in Ecuador. What we have here is a book with riddles compiled by Jacqueline, actually. So you see, we are not only working with indigenous languages of Mexico, but rather, because of long-lasting relationships. We're talking again with a friendship of more than 20 years with Jacqueline. So this is what makes projects work. That kind of personal relationship with people sometimes, no? And she compiled this booklet, and again, I'll talk more about that later after lunch. It's designed, the drawings are made by primary school children, Mapuche children. And we have here one of the riddles, for example, and it says what it is. I'm just translating what it is. It has a mouth, but it doesn't speak. It has feet, but it doesn't walk. So apart from Jacqueline and Tanya, maybe there, that of course know the answer. Does anyone know the answer to that riddle? It has a mouth, but it doesn't speak. It has feet, but it doesn't, it walks, sorry, it does walk, it walks, but it doesn't have any feet. What it is? No, it's not a walking mouth. No, not a walking mouth. It's in the drawing. It's in the drawing. I'm showing you this example so that you see how cultural specific, those riddles and the booklets that we do are, because they come from the community. They come from knowledge from the community. And of course, this riddle, for Mapuche people and for Mapuche children, they would be like, I know, me, I know, maybe that is, anyone? A mouth, so you put it on, something that you put on. The manta, the poncho, or macuñ in Mapudungun. So again, look at the children here. This is the booklet, distributed in a Mapuche school, and look what the children are wearing. They're wearing the manta. Right? They're wearing the manta, and that's Jacqueline distributed books. And this is just an example for you to see how augmented reality works. And basically, I'm not going to play because I don't want to waste too much time. But basically what you do is you put your phone on the book, and then you can see the animation. You can see, the images moving in the booklet, and you can hear, what it's the story, the riddle, the tongue twister that is presented in the booklet, okay? This is amazing because you would never guess, that Mexican indigenous people, and Jose Antonio, for example, has been in a partnership with people from Yakutia in the Republic of Yakutia in the Russian Federation, and this is riddles and stories in Saja, in the Saja language. So replicating, the kind of materials that we do in Mexico in a completely different context of Siberia. And again, I don't know whether we can hear to this or we'll hear a little bit of Saja. So that's what you can do with the booklets. And then, since we've been talking also about music, what we have here is also a lot of work that we've been doing lately with music, working with rappers and working with not just rappers, also with other music genres in Mexico. Very, very, very active artists singing in, very different genres. We have lots of rap, but we also have ska, we have reggae, and producing music in indigenous languages. And this is one CD produced by the project. And now Jose Antonio is kind of producing another one, which is going to be only women singing in indigenous languages in Mexico. So conclusion, and then, as I said, this has been a little bit quick, but I'll delve into all these issues a little bit later when we meet after lunch. It does, the project, it does integrate biocultural memory, biocultural knowledge, also oral traditions, how important those are, and immersive digital environments. It's so playful, again, learning a language and trying to revitalize an indigenous language has to be some kind of fun. It has to be playful. No? So it's place-based pedagogy that supports language acquisition. It addresses challenges, to limited internet access. So not all the eggs are in the digital basket. If you like, we actually print out, the booklets, and for example, the riddles in Mapudungun are just printed out and distributed, and it's a coloring book. So the children do color the books by hand, using pencils, and you don't need the internet for that. Reinforces positive identity, something we've said we've seen in other presentations. And Jose Antonio has written here, reverses language shift, contributing to the contemporary vitality and socio-cognitive well-being of indigenous peoples. I think it's a little bit too far-fetched to say reversing language shift. And again, after lunch, I'll say a little bit more. I think it does change attitudes. It brings, a little bit of language reclamation, if you like, but I'm not really sure that it does actually, reverses language shift. It's a little bit more complicated than printing a few books. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. So there's definitely a link, a bridge to the afternoon session.
Mm-hmm.
And now I would like to invite all our speakers to take the seats. Supair, Chukska, Carlos Eduardo, Eli Kasha. So before we start the session, I'd like to remind you very quickly, just to give the main ideas, preliminarily concluding the presentation. So I think we could divide them into actually 9 topics. Well, and then entitled them from language revitalization to regeneration of life. So first and fundamental transformation emerging from all presentations concerns the very concept of language revitalization. So traditionally, the term has been associated with institutional efforts, Yet what the panel has demonstrated repeatedly and convincingly is that such a framing is sufficient. So taken together, very briefly, these perspectives invite us to move beyond revitalization as recovery, towards revitalization as regeneration of life itself. So the second issue, to sum up, is the dimension concerns the inseparability of language from territory, not simply as physical space, but as a lived relational ontology. Across all presentations, the issue of intergenerational transmission emerges as both the central challenge and the primary site of intervention. Another important dimension being the diversification of spaces in which activism takes place. A significant conceptual contribution of this panel lies also in its redefinition of community engagement as sovereignty. Language revitalization is also shown to involve profound processes of internal transformation within communities, which focus on identity, culture, and the internal coherence. Then technology, power, and critical engagement, and also language as well-being and healing. And okay, please, if you have questions, comments.
Thank you, everybody. Muchas gracias a todos. Muchas gracias. No sé quién había que utilizar. So, utilizaré el español porque algunos de ustedes lo usan y después el inglés también. Tres preguntas. Una, cuando los estudiantes van a instituciones externas, a universidades, esa es una pregunta que ya le hice a Jacqueline ayer. ¿Cómo hacen para que la institución y la cultura externa no se los coman? ¿Cómo hacen para que sobrevivan a eso y además creen espacios dentro de las instituciones para de alguna manera subvertir esa cultura? In terms of documentation, we have done documentation as linguists for us. So one of the questions that we have been talking about lately is, if you want to deposit anything in a repository, it has to be for linguists. It has to be for the linguistic community. What are our options to not do that? What are the options to create spaces for the communities to do it for themselves without paying a price, without paying the toll that the linguistic communities and the archive in the linguistic communities are asking of these things? And the third question is for Laila. When you said that language is here and it goes over to the spiritual world, what happens with people that sign? What happens with people that do not speak with their voices, but speak with their bodies and their hands?
Okay, so who would like to start?
I would like to. Thank you very much for those questions. Thank you very much for those questions. I maybe could add a few words when it comes to documentation, because that's what we do as descriptive linguists. We document and then we just put it in the archive, and hopefully one day someone will see it. But I think there is also a lot of efforts recently to kind of create a community-friendly archives. So it's not just linguists for linguists and sharing the data, if you will, but it's specifically for the people. And you can see it in terms of, for instance, South American indigenous languages. There are archives of all of these types, and the communities access them. So, for instance, Adilla is it is an archive in Colombia, the Universidad Nacional de Colombia. that allows, for instance, they have huge collections of songs, for instance, of traditional narratives, and the communities actually just go back to them and they take those recordings and they, they share among themselves. So this is more of a archive that is community friendly. So I know the types of the archives you are talking about, because obviously this is, but there are ones that are really community friendly and people actually use it. I know of many of the Caquetá Putumayo groups that just refer to those archives to download songs and then share in the Malocas and to listen at night, for instance. So some work. And some are friendly. Not all of them. Well, most of them are not. But thank you very much.
Can I just add just very briefly before we go on to the other question? There's a few examples of very, very good projects of documenting with the community. Now, one is Marlene Habut, Oralidad y Modernidad in Ecuador, what she calls active documentation. And that active documentation means that all the documentation is made along with the community, and they produce really, really good pedagogical materials also out of the documentation, which is high quality. And the other one I can think of, because these are people that I know personally, I know those projects really well, is Carlos Sánchez Avendaño at the University of Costa Rica. Both are very much documenting indigenous languages with the community, with pedagogical, with revitalization in mind. So it can be done. It can be done, and we can really, move beyond the structure-based linguistics. No? That's something for later also. No? Just
to maybe to add to what I was saying, just those archives that I'm talking about, it's also they're also done with the community for the community. That's why they are the community friendly. So it's not just done by linguists and just let's have a look. So this is what I was also talking about. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Thank you.
¿Algo más?
Sobre la primera pregunta, que cómo hacen los estudiantes una vez que tienen que cambiarse de sistema. En el caso mapuche, el programa de educación intercultural bilingüe está a partir desde el año 96 y tiene hasta lo que nosotros llamamos el sistema básico, que llega hasta los 13 años. Comienza con el preescolar. Eso ha sido muy, muy interesante que hayan comenzado con el preescolar. Y sin embargo, donde está la brecha, donde está la situación compleja, es en lo que nosotros llamamos educación media, o que ustedes dirían secundaria. Porque de la básica salen bastante fortalecidos respecto de su identidad, pero al llegar al sistema de la educación media, no hay nada en la etapa adolescente de los jóvenes. Y posteriormente, los que deciden continuar en la universidad, en una gran cantidad de universidades en el país hay algunos programas que están orientados a jóvenes indígenas. Por ejemplo, la Universidad de Chile, la Universidad del Biobío, bueno, la nuestra, la Universidad de la Frontera y la Universidad de los Lagos, hace ya más de 10 años han venido desarrollando programas de fortalecimiento cultural y programas de revitalización lingüística, en el sentido que además se ha incluido el mapuzungún en algunas partes como lengua obligatoria y en otros como electivos. Entonces, de alguna manera hay espacios donde se pueden encontrar cuando están en la universidad. La carencia está en la educación secundaria. Y hasta ahora lo que está ocurriendo es que en algunas ciudades se están partiendo con programas pilotos ya post pandemia. Desde la pandemia fue el 2020, como desde el 2022 comenzaron a implementarse unos pilotos en algunos liceos que allá se llaman emblemáticos, que son liceos públicos, y cuya población también, de acuerdo a la ley, que establece que si hay el 30% de población indígena, es obligatorio enseñar. Pero acá, como se trata de la secundaria, es decisión en realidad de las autoridades de los colegios. Entonces, en este nivel todavía está muy, muy incipiente. pero la universidad está movilizándose un poquito más. No quiero decir que sea mucho tampoco. En el caso, por ejemplo, específico de la Universidad de la Frontera, hay un proyecto que se financió desde hace ya casi 20 años con la Fundación Ford, que se llama Proyecto Rupu, y que lo que hacía era reunir, enviaba una carta, un correo electrónico a todos los estudiantes que se identificaban como mapuche, porque cuando ingresan a la universidad hay que llenar un formulario y en el formulario se les pregunta si se identifican, con qué grupo se identifican. Por eso que yo hablaba de cómo fue aumentando el número de estudiantes que se identifican como mapuche. Entonces, este programa les fortalece con algunas debilidades que tienen, dado que los estudiantes mapuches no provienen de los mejores colegios que acceden a la universidad. Entonces ahí allí se les apoya con las materias que les resulten más complejas, pero además se agregan talleres de orden cultural y lingüístico. Entonces, así, de los 3.000, más o menos unos 1.000 van a esos talleres. O sea, hay un grupo bien interesante ahí que va y que después, bueno, integran lo del Palín y así van saliendo otros grupos porque están bastante organizados los muchachos en la universidad. Eso.
Muchas gracias. ¿Algo más? Sí.
Sí. Bien, relacionado al tema de en el sistema educativo, en el marco de la transformación educativa en Colombia y para los pueblos indígenas, pues con el actual presidente que está terminando, hemos logrado dar una fuerza hacia esa necesidad tan grande que nosotros veníamos luchando. Y dentro de ese escenario, sí, como tal, en el tema educativo ha sido uno de los factores que nos ha debilitado la lengua. Y dentro de ese ejercicio, para el tema de nosotros, ¿qué estrategias hacer dentro de la institucionalidad? Pues el referente, el pueblo vasco, hemos empezado a construir las metodologías de enseñanza desde la lengua. Y en ello, para este proceso, como esta segunda etapa de la revitalización que les comentaba, pues es por allí la raíz, porque tenemos que empezar desde las semillitas, darle la educación desde la lengua para la previvencia cultural. Pero como tal, el sistema educativo a nivel nacional, pues nos ha dado el privilegio, pero ya en la práctica es donde muchos pueblos, organizaciones nos hemos quedado, sabiendo que tenemos un derecho de enseñar en nuestra lengua, hablar en nuestra lengua, pero ya el tema educativo se enfocó desde los indicadores nacionales. Entonces es lo que nos ha llevado, pero bueno, creo que la tarea grande es la transformación desde los territorios para los territorios.
Gracias.
Perdón. Yo solamente quería añadir una cosita, si puedo hablar español. Porque, por ejemplo, el problema con el sistema educativo en Colombia es que sí reconocen las lenguas indígenas en sus territorios y todo, pero las lenguas indígenas tienen muchísimos dialectos. Y, por ejemplo, en el caso de los huitotos, o de la gente muruimuina, que hoy en día llamamos muruimuina, tienen al menos 4. Pero la lengua estándar no existe. Pero lo que quiere el Estado es enseñar el estándar que no existe. Entonces, lo que se enseña o lo que intentan hacer es enseñar algo que sea más o menos estándar y la gente no lo quiere. Entonces eso debilita muchísimo la enseñanza y por eso como estaba hablando que aunque sí está reconocido, aunque sí hay la educación, pero la práctica deja mucho para desear.
Thank you. Let's go. Still the first question.
Really quick on the topic of documentation, something we're seeing in our work is the importance to demystify that concept of documentation. I think there's still a misconception that it's still the job of a linguist and job of an external linguist more than anything. But I think showing opportunities for communities to learn those skills and, and I think just kind of explaining concepts, because I think there's still groups that think archiving, you upload it on YouTube and that's archiving. And obviously we know that's not the case, but also even the term archiving, sometimes it conjures up images of a big bank vault where you put information to preserve it and not having really access to it. And I think that's really important. And just, leveraging that local knowledge. We offered some community documentation workshops and just kind of seeing how speakers, come alive with being able to explain like what they're seeing on screen, just things that they are common knowledge for them, that how can they leverage that for their community and finding ways to put it in the hands of the community. So.
Thank you, Eddie. Podemos continuar con preguntas siguientes. So.
Hola, jo també parlaré en castellà i en anglès, perquè no, he de fer totes dues perquè la pregunta és una, molt breu, però és per tothom i per tant no m'entendrien. Bueno, si m'entenen, d'acord, però si no, ho farem tots dos, m'ho diuen. D'acord? Lo que me interesa mucho a mí es saber qué factor hubo que desencadenó la revitalización de las comunidades en defender sus propias lenguas, porque por lo que yo he visto en mi propio estudio de hace 20 y pico de años, hubo una generación que fue directamente atacada por la educación y que fueron humillados y que dijeron no queremos saber nada más con la lengua, interrumpieron, y una generación posterior que dice no, hay que recuperar esto. Yo lo que vi en mi experiencia personal, que claro es muy limitada, pero en México, en donde en aquellos momentos no se ocupaba nadie de la lengua, fue grupos, por ejemplo, pues un grupo de gente que se habían puesto a preguntarle a la gente mayor que dijera sus historias y luego habían hecho teatro, o sea, eran grupos como activistas. Pregunto eso a todo el mundo porque pienso que con la experiencia que tenemos ahora podríamos tal vez incluso crear ese tipo de fenómenos que reiniciaran en muchos pueblos que todavía no están atreviéndose a recuperar su lengua y a revitalizarla, y eso a partir de saber cuál ha sido la experiencia de iniciación de eso en su experiencia de ustedes en sus comunidades. No sé si está claro lo que pregunto. Todos me entendieron, ¿verdad?
So did everybody understand? Is there somebody to?
Gracias. So for the Heshquit language in particular, I think the key for myself, in my own experience as a person born into the English language and understanding, growing up as an English understander only, that it was a feeling that that I was able to hang on to for a long time, that kept me connected to wanting to learn my language. So that feeling I came to learn was within my Shipmaksti, the area that I was talking about within the upper torso. And all of those teachings about Shipmaksti weren't available to me or anybody in my generation. So I feel like there are certain aspects of our language that are not known by a large part of the population in Canada, that they remain to be shed light on, because there are certain there's a lot of processes blocking that information sharing, right? So for myself, it was having the knowledge that feeling is part of understanding and learning in our language, and that those two are inseparable, just as the language is inseparable from the land. So are our feelings.
In our case, when we come across a dominant community, when you live inside a dominant community, and you sometimes you experience stigmas, stereotypings, and shaming as well. So sometimes these are the triggers which motivate you to do the documentation and revitalization work. That is one factor. The other, if universities and research centers don't come to save these languages and promote these languages, there are organizations which are proselytizing, which are preaching faith-based organization, which often comes to the indigenous communities in order to document and preserve their languages, but behind these visible things, they have their own agenda to convert these people to their religion. So that is another. So I think we should also be aware of that. And there are many organizations they do that. It is like the colonization of the same 16th century period, doing the other way. I think that in many parts of the world, the indigenous communities were converted to different religions. I mean, mostly Christianity, because these technical and well-funded organizations belong to Christians, evangelical or Anglican kind of preachers things. So they come to some communities. When the communities are left unaware and left excluded by their government and by their research institute and universities, so they are prone to be converted and to be marginalized and to be colonized in another way.
Quiero hacer un aporte a la primera pregunta de la compañera, también el tema espiritual. En el tema espiritual, es una comunicación de cómo yo siento y lo vivo. No es que me van a imponer. Es la visión que también hoy se respeta, teniendo claro los diferentes pensamientos, credos y religiosos. En el tema de la revitalización, nosotros hay una mirada pedagógica de que como usted siente y piensa, pero trabaja alrededor de la cultura, hágalo, pero no lo haga porque le toca, sino siéntalo. Esa es la conexión eh, espiritual, natural de vivir con estas prácticas. Eso quería un poco aportar si a su inquietud o pregunta. En el tema de la compañera, me parece muy importante la pregunta, siendo yo en este proceso, digo joven, la vivencia del pueblo como tal, yo tengo la lengua impregnada y enraizada es por mis abuelos. Crecí con ellos y conozco qué es vivir en la lengua. Y mi reto, tuve también esas como debilidades que la educación me estaba absorbiendo, porque 6 años en el proceso formativo, luego a la universidad, volví a retomar ese proceso porque mi proyecto de grado se planteó en eso, de revitalizar lo que soy yo, la lengua, la cultura, y nos dio la posibilidad también que a nivel organizacional el territorio, las autoridades empezaran a mirar cómo está en un diagnóstico que yo les mostraba. Entonces, allí empezamos nosotros a ver cómo vamos a revitalizar y cómo lo vamos a hacer, para qué lo vamos a hacer. Primero, haciendo una investigación y entendiendo la raíz, hacia dónde queremos seguir perviviendo. Y eso es lo que nos llevó a nosotros hoy de que a nivel del pueblo NASA, la organización indígena pues está apuntando a unos sueños a que se debe revitalizar para el cuidado de Umaquihue, el corazón de nuestro ser, del territorio indígena, y en ello por eso la voz, la lengua que yo hablo, es la voz de la madre naturaleza, es el regalo de ella, y por respeto a ella nosotros tenemos que cuidarla. Al hablar la lengua estamos fortaleciendo un territorio.
En mi situación o en el caso mapuche es muy similar a lo que plantea aquí el Lamien Carlos. Para nosotros como mapuche la lengua está íntimamente vinculada con la naturaleza. Yo vengo de una familia tradicional mapuche, aprendí la lengua en la casa, y después con la escuela pasa uno el mismo proceso que señalé de que cuando al llegar a la enseñanza media uno sale del pueblo y se encuentra negando su lengua y negando también su identidad. Hasta que cuando pasa a la universidad, muchos de nosotros iniciamos un proceso de reetnificación, tanto cultural como lingüística, y nos volvemos a encontrar con la lengua. Y es más, lo que yo puedo señalar para el caso mapuche, la lengua, si bien se fue desplazando muy aceleradamente, siempre en los sectores rurales han quedado hablantes de mapuzungún. Y los mayores, los ancianos, siempre han estado hablando en esa lengua. Entonces, si uno quiere ser parte de la ceremonia, si uno quiere ser parte del cotidiano, necesariamente nos obligaba a ir a aprender. Pero hay toda esa generación que debido a todo lo que sufrió no quiso transmitir la lengua y ahora está en un proceso yo hablo de que estamos en tiempos del Muñotu, que significa el tiempo del retorno, porque se ha producido también que toda la migración que se fue a la ciudad de Santiago, a las tres grandes capitales, a Santiago, Temuco y Concepción, en estos tiempos comenzaron a retornar y nunca perdieron la lengua en la ciudad, aunque no la usaron, y ahora retornaron sobre los 60, 75 años y están usando la lengua en los territorios.
I'm sorry, I forgot about a standby question from Jaime.
Hello. ¿Funciona? Bueno, sí. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is about a dilemma that I think bueno, voy a hablar en castellano, si me entendéis, ¿no? Mi pregunta es sobre un dilema que yo creo que existe en las comunidades con relación a la academia, ¿no? Que es el tema del día de hoy, y que en general existe en cualquier hablante de lengua minorizada, que es el dilema en cuestiones académicas, internacionales, como precisamente este fórum, de a veces tener que elegir entre la lengua hegemónica a nivel estatal y la lengua hegemónica a nivel internacional. Es decir, elegir entre la lengua del Estado, que en la mayoría de vuestro caso sería el castellano, o el urdu, y la lengua internacional impuesta, que es el inglés, y que además está siempre aparejado con una serie de hegemonía también política de Estados Unidos o del Estado que sea. Entonces, ¿cómo las comunidades cómo dan respuesta a este dilema que sigue dándose? En Cataluña también ocurre a veces de tener que elegir. Yo lo digo porque, por ejemplo, en una universidad catalana, para hacer la tesis final del máster, hay que elegir entre hacerla en inglés o en castellano. No es posible hacerla en catalán. El Pompeu Fabra, además, que por contexto es una universidad que lleva el nombre del pues uno de los principales exponentes de la defensa de la lengua catalana. Entonces, ¿cómo dan respuesta a este dilema de elegir entre la lengua hegemónica internacional y la lengua hegemónica estatal, que ambas acaban oprimiendo vuestra propia lengua? Gracias.
Gracias.
Yeah, very interesting question. I will answer from my perspective, my context. We have not only two languages, but three choice of four languages: the mother tongue, then the regional language Pashto, then the Urdu, the national language, state language, and then English, the international language. And people usually, the indigenous people, they usually love these two languages, Urdu and English, because of economic advancement and other things as well, and also social prestige attached to these languages. And Urdu is the state language. So people, what we do and what we have been doing is smaller private interventions to preserve, to promote, and to revitalize our languages. As I showed in my slides, the last slide, that the usage of domains are shrinking because of, that on social media, even though we have Gboard and for Android, but still the younger generations, the youth, more than 90% of them still write in Urdu. Their status, their post and feedbacks in Urdu are in English, not using their own language because of they think that okay, when they write their in their own language, so it is very limited community, and when they write in Urdu, so it will go beyond borders even to the national state. So I think again this particular thing what we have, and the other challenge is when you in our context when you do the work of revitalization, so it is very difficult to convince the community to care for their languages and to do work for them. But when you sustain your work for some time, then you have some models. For instance, when we started the mother tongue education in our language, so we got very meager, very small response from the community. But over time, when our students went to other schools and performed best in their classrooms, so then community was convinced, okay, these schools are better, the mother tongue schools are better. So there are huge challenges being in a multilingual disparity in our case. I mean, and as you mentioned, Catalan and Spanish and English as well. So the similar situations. But what we have been doing, educating with the government that the state should take concrete steps in order to include these languages in public education and also change their policy, language and education policy. That way, I think we can sustain the revitalization work. Otherwise, I have less hope.
Thank you, Zubair. Okay. Jacqueline.
Encuentro que la pregunta es muy buena. Es una excelente pregunta porque es una reflexión constante que uno se hace en el mundo académico, sobre todo además si uno pertenece a un pueblo minorizado y observa que lo que está ocurriendo en los espacios académicos, para mí, se trata de folclorización lingüística. Es decir, tenemos que nos podemos relacionar en esta lengua, se pueden promover una serie de actividades en la lengua. Por ejemplo, ahora nosotros, como les comentaba, viene Buñuel-Chipantu, que se celebra en la universidad mañana viernes, y va a estar todo el mundo tratando incluso de decir saludar en Mapudungun, Marimari, desde el rector hasta todos los estamentos. Pero sin embargo, para las titulaciones, para poder titularse, hay que tener aprobado inglés. Es decir, un cierto nivel de inglés para poder optar a titulación. Y en el caso de los estudiantes mapuches, lo han planteado desde ya hace mucho tiempo, especialmente aquellos que es su primera lengua, pero nunca se les ha permitido que puedan, que se considere esa como una segunda lengua. Porque además hay toda una política nacional que lleva a una política nacional que incluso se difunde por la radio, la televisión, los periódicos, Chile país bilingüe, pero Chile país bilingüe pensando en castellano e inglés. Entonces, en ese sentido, para las lenguas minorizadas, estamos todavía a una distancia muy grande de que se puedan considerar dentro de la academia. A la academia, y esto lo digo yo siendo parte, le sirve para describir. O sea, podemos describir el mapuzungún, podemos describir el aymara, estudiamos tipología lingüística, estudiamos lexicografía, un montón de cosas, pero la transformación de las políticas educativas en el ámbito universitario todavía están y menos en el nivel de posgrado. Eso es claramente difícil que alguna vez lleguemos ojalá que sí. O sea, yo creo que sí. Me gusta él porque me dice, tenemos que hacerlo. Sí. Así que eso es lo que ocurre. O sea, yo lo veo todavía en el plano de la folclorización lingüística.
Gracias, Jacqueline. Can we go to the next question?
Thank you very much for this informative and exciting series of presentations. I just have got one key question. When you are in your projects on language revitalization, is the focus ultimately on language, or is the focus on communication? What ultimately are you seeking to revitalize? Because if the focus is on language, then the intellectual trajectory of what you are doing is going to be different from if the focus is on communication. And I also was quite encouraged to hear the arguments that, oh, you're working with communities, etc., etc. I think that's positive. But the philosophical challenge is that the underlying ideologies of language by linguists may be very different from the underlying ideologies of communication by the communities that you are dealing with. The linguists are happy to talk of disembodied language separate from gestures, history, memory, affect, etc. But the communities don't make that separation, right? And I think one of you was also talking about ancestral histories, spirituality, etc. But that's not the type of linguistics, that's not the type of scholarship linguists are good at.
Thank you very much. I think there will be a lot of answers. Kasia?
Thank you for the question. I think I can briefly answer from the perspective of the Caquetá Putumayo people and their focus. Obviously, there is two types of revitalization, if you will. There is the community revitalization, where the elders revitalize by bringing people and installing the knowledge from the beginning. They repeatedly said, like, when I started working there some over 15 years ago, I remember the elders were already saying the communication, the Colombian government has failed us. They taught us to go to schools and they teach us the language there. We come out not knowing anything. So they forced the kids to go back to the Maloca and install the knowledge from the semillas, so from the, what is it called? The seeds, and learn the culture through the language, because the only way for, as the elders say, the only way for the kids to understand the value of the language is by communicating in the world. So, and then you have linguists such as myself at the beginning, true, come and they describe the language, they produce the grammars, they produce the booklets, and the people say, well, we are not visual, we can't read, we don't want to read, we learn by doing, not by doing, by reading. And it's true. So there is two types of revitalization going on. Linguists generally who produce books and grammars and they leave it to the community, mostly in English. And the indigenous people, they speak Amazonian Spanish, which isn't even standard Colombian Spanish, who can't read those things. Those are descriptive, those are descriptions that can only be read by the linguist. So it's linguist for linguists. And you call it revitalization because you've produced the grammar. So the language exists in the academic world, but for the community, it doesn't mean anything. So, so generally, the elders say, well, fine, we are happy that we have our grammar, so you've proven that the language exists. In Colombia, we are not the people, we have our own language, so we can claim the rights for the lands as well, because you have to prove that you have a language, you have to show the Bible of your language. But it's for the people themselves, it's not about that. This doesn't matter. It's only for the external recognition somewhere in the government of Bogota. But it's not about this. So the elders said, well, we bring the kids to the Maloca now. We teach the language so they can communicate, not write. They don't need to write. They don't need to do this. They need to be able to understand the world by talking.
Thank you, Kasia. Dubai, yes?
One of the strategies, I think, is to revitalize the language through cultural activities. because culture is very much embedded within the society and people love it, and it is very emotional thing. So what we do that, we saw that only describing a language or writing a grammar sketch or books do not work within for the community. But when you start celebrating the cultural, for example, musical traditions, and also documenting and promoting the folklore, stories and folk poetry, so that people gradually begin to love that, and thus the language is revitalized, also the culture is promoted. But in our case, we have another challenge as well. You know, about Pakistani society, it is very much rigidly religious society, yeah, and Islamism. So when you start do some cultural activities, we have another type of colonization, this Arab colonization. So they stigmatize you, and they call it profane and immoral things. So, but what we have seen that when you go to the community and practice their own culture, then they can do that. Otherwise, they don't like, they may be because of the religious sense, they may not like music, but they like their own music. That is a very beautiful thing, what we have experiencing.
Okay.
So the aim of our language program is to repeatedly do what our ancestors would do. And that's muta. But that doesn't mean that, like, some people might think that, okay, we're doing it the way our ancestors do. That's associated with ancient things. We're bringing back non-technological things. That's not the case, because we've always been highly adaptable people and really intelligent people. So what we mean by muta, doing what our ancestors did, also means taking up those skills, and while also depathologizing our ways of learning, like relying on dreams for learning, relying on other spiritual aspects of our lives for learning and teaching. We need to... There was one more point I wanted to make about it, about repeatedly doing what our ancestors do. Oh, yeah. One thing that our ancestors at home really believed in was that you could receive communications. And one night I was working on real slow dial-up internet at home on this program, Adobe InDesign, to format the dictionary that we were working on. And so I suddenly woke up because this ancestor told me about a quick keystroke on the computer, so that it fixed all of the issues with the InDesign program. So I pushed down those 3 keys they told me to, instructions, and it fixed the whole thing. Everything was perfect after that, was ready to print. So yeah, it doesn't, for us, doing what our ancestors did means continuing to use all of our talents and to go with the rules that came from that land.
Thank you, Chuska. Okay, so do we have any more questions? Okay, thank you so much for this very inspiring I think we all have learned really a lot. We could discuss our doubts and questions. So do I understand well? We can now expect the lunch break, can we? Thank you very much. So the lunch is waiting.